As the handcuffs clicked shut around Marcus Thompson's wrists, a wave of disbelief washed over him. He stood there, immobilized not by the metal restraints, but by the surreal absurdity of the situation. The two officers who had detained him seemed oblivious to the growing crowd gathering nearby. Some onlookers whispered among themselves while others openly gawked, their phones held up to capture every detail of the unfolding drama. For Marcus, it felt like time had slowed down, each second stretching into an eternity. One of the officers, a tall man with a square jaw and a stern expression, barked orders at Marcus as if he were addressing a common criminal. "Don't move," he snapped, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous terminal. "We're taking you in for questioning." His partner, shorter and wiry, nodded in agreement, keeping a firm grip on Marcus's arm. Neither of them showed any sign of recognizing or caring about the weight of what they were doing. Marcus took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm despite the rising frustration bubbling inside him. "I've already shown you my credentials," he said evenly, his tone measured and composed. "You can verify my identity through any federal database. This is a mistake." But the taller officer shook his head dismissively. "We'll see." "About that," he muttered, glancing at his partner with a smirk. It was clear they weren't interested in verifying anything. Not yet, anyway. Instead, they began leading Marcus toward a side exit, away from the prying eyes of the public. The walk felt endless. Every step drew more attention, and soon, a small group of curious travelers trailed behind, murmuring questions to one another. "Is that really the FBI director?" someone asked aloud. Another voice chimed in, "It has to be. Look at his badge." Yet no one dared intervene. Fear and uncertainty hung thick in the air, paralyzing those who might otherwise have spoken. Up. As they reached a secluded corner near a service entrance, the officers stopped abruptly. One of them pulled out a radio, presumably to call for backup or inform their superiors. Meanwhile, the other kept a tight hold on Marcus, his posture tense and defensive, as though expecting resistance. But Marcus remained still, his face a mask of stoic resolve. He knew better than to fight back physically. Doing so would only escalate the situation and give these men an excuse to justify their actions later. For a brief moment, Marcus allowed himself to reflect on how quickly things had spiraled out of control. Just hours ago, he'd been preparing for a routine trip, a chance to share his vision for reforming law enforcement at a prestigious conference. Now, he was standing in handcuffs, humiliated in front of strangers, all because two officers refused to acknowledge the truth staring them in the face. It was infuriating, yes, but also profoundly sad. How could anyone entrusted with protecting the public act with such blatant disregard for justice? Suddenly, a commotion erupted nearby. A middle-aged woman, her hair streaked with gray, pushed her way through the growing crowd. Her eyes locked onto Marcus, wide with recognition. "Wait a minute," she exclaimed, pointing directly at him. "That's Marcus Thompson. I saw him on the news last week talking about police accountability. You can't arrest him, he's the FBI director." Her words sent ripples through the crowd. People exchanged astonished looks, some nodding in agreement while others whipped out their phones to confirm her claim. Within moments, images of Marcus appeared on social media feeds, accompanied by hashtags like Free Marcus Thompson and Justice for All. The momentum shifted almost instantly, turning what had been a private humiliation into a very public spectacle. The officers froze, clearly unnerved by the sudden surge of attention. The taller one glanced nervously at his partner, then back at Marcus. "Are you sure this is him?" he whispered, his earlier bravado crumbling under the weight of scrutiny. "I don't know," the shorter officer stammered, his grip loosening ever so slightly. "What do we do now?" Before either of them could decide, a senior TSA agent arrived on the scene. Clad in a crisp uniform and exuding authority, the agent introduced himself as Lieutenant Harris. After surveying the situation, he demanded an explanation. When the officers hesitated, fumbling over their words, Harris stepped forward and addressed Marcus directly. "Sir, I apologize for this misunderstanding. Let me sort this out immediately." Harris wasted no time. Pulling out his own device, he accessed airport surveillance footage and cross-referenced it with federal databases. Within minutes, the truth became undeniable. Marcus Thompson was exactly who he claimed to be, the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The revelation hit the two arresting officers like a ton of bricks. Their faces turned pale and beads of sweat formed on their foreheads as they realized the magnitude of their error. One of them, the taller officer, dropped to his knees without warning, his hands clasped together in a desperate plea. "Please, forgive us, sir," he blurted out, his voice trembling. "We didn't mean to. We thought—" He trailed off, unable to finish his sentence. His partner followed suit, kneeling beside him, tears welling up in his eyes. "We made a terrible mistake," he choked out. "We're so sorry." The sight was surreal. Here were two men, representatives of law enforcement, who had acted with such arrogance and prejudice mere moments ago, now reduced to begging for mercy. Marcus stared at them, his expression unreadable. Part of him wanted to lash out, to demand answers for the indignity he had endured, but another part understood that anger wouldn't solve anything. This wasn't just about him, it was about exposing the flaws in a system that allowed such behavior to persist. With great effort, Marcus swallowed his pride and spoke. "This isn't about forgiveness," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that silenced everyone within earshot. "It's about accountability. What happened here today shouldn't happen to anyone, regardless of who they are. If we want to rebuild trust between communities and law enforcement, incidents like this must stop." His words hung in the air, resonating deeply with those present. The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the terminal. For many, this moment represented something bigger than Marcus himself. It was proof that even the most powerful individuals weren't immune to systemic injustice, and it underscored the urgent need for change. As the officers rose shakily to their feet, visibly shaken, Lieutenant Harris assured Marcus that disciplinary action would follow. "These men will be held accountable," he promised, his tone firm, "and will ensure that proper protocols are followed moving forward." Though the immediate crisis had passed, Marcus knew the battle was far from over. As he rubbed his sore wrists and adjusted his jacket, he couldn't help but think about the countless others who hadn't been as fortunate. For every high-profile case like his, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of stories that never made headlines. Stories of ordinary people whose lives had been shattered by similar acts of bias and misconduct. With renewed determination, Marcus straightened his posture and took a step forward. The ordeal may have left its mark, but it had also strengthened his resolve. If nothing else, this experience had reminded him why he had chosen this path in the first place: to fight for justice, equality, and a better future for all. The hours following Marcus Thompson's arrest at LAX were a whirlwind of emotions, reactions, and revelations. As news of the incident spread like wildfire across social media platforms, people from all walks of life weighed in on what had transpired. Videos of the arrest, captured by bystanders, went viral almost instantly, sparking outrage, disbelief, and calls for accountability. The hashtag #Justice for Marcus Thompson trended nationwide, with millions sharing their thoughts, frustrations, and demands for reform. By the time Marcus was finally released, the story had already reached the highest levels of government. Senators, congressmen, and civil rights leaders issued statements condemning the officer's actions, while late-night talk show hosts used the incident as fodder for biting commentary about systemic racism in law enforcement. For many Americans, seeing someone as powerful and respected as the FBI director subjected to such blatant prejudice was both shocking and infuriating. It wasn't just an isolated case, it was a glaring example of how deeply ingrained biases could override logic, authority, and even common sense. As Marcus stepped out of the airport terminal into the cool Los Angeles night, he was greeted by a swarm of reporters and camera crews. Flashbulbs popped relentlessly, illuminating his weary but resolute face. Despite everything he'd endured, Marcus maintained his composure, knowing that this moment carried far greater significance than his personal ordeal. This wasn't just about him. It was about sending a message to the entire nation. Standing before the assembled press corps, Marcus took a deep breath and began to speak. "Tonight," he said, his voice steady and measured, "we witnessed something that should never happen in a society built on principles of fairness and equality. Two officers sworn to uphold the law chose instead to act on assumptions rooted in bias and fear. In doing so, they not only disrespected me as an individual, but also undermined the trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "What happened here today is not unique. Every day, countless individuals, particularly those from marginalized communities, face similar indignities. The difference is that most of them don't have the platform or resources to bring attention to these injustices. Tonight I stand here not just as Marcus Thompson, the FBI director, but as a representative of everyone who has ever been wrongfully targeted because of the color of their skin, their accent, or their appearance." His speech struck a chord with listeners, resonating deeply with those who had long felt powerless against institutionalized discrimination. Social media erupted once again, this time filled with messages of solidarity and admiration for Marcus's poise under pressure. Memes and tributes flooded timelines, portraying him as a symbol of resilience and hope. Yet amidst the praise, there was also anger, a collective fury directed at the officers involved in the system that allowed such behavior to occur in the first place. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, efforts to hold the offending officers accountable were already underway. Lieutenant Harris, the senior TSA agent who had intervened during the arrest, wasted no time filing a formal report detailing the events. He included surveillance footage, witness statements, and screenshots of the viral videos capturing the officers' misconduct. Within hours, the LAPD launched an internal investigation, promising transparency and swift action. The two officers, whose names were later revealed as Officers Greg Nolan and Ryan Chavez, were placed on administrative leave pending further review. Their colleagues at the precinct reacted with a mix of shock, embarrassment, and defensiveness. Some defended the pair, arguing that they had simply been doing their jobs and making a split-second decision based on limited information. Others condemned their actions, calling them reckless and unprofessional. Tensions ran high as debates raged over whether the incident represented an isolated lapse in judgment or a symptom of deeper issues within the department. Back in Washington, D.C., political leaders seized the opportunity to push for broader reforms. Members of Congress introduced legislation aimed at addressing racial profiling and improving accountability measures within law enforcement agencies. Civil rights organizations held rallies outside police headquarters nationwide, demanding justice, not only for Marcus but for all victims of discriminatory practices. Protest signs bore slogans like, "Even the FBI director isn't safe and bias has no place in blue." For Marcus, the days following the arrest were a blur of interviews, meetings, and strategy sessions. He met with key figures in the Department of Justice discussing potential policy changes that could prevent similar incidents in the future. He also reached out to community leaders, listening to their stories and incorporating their perspectives into his advocacy work. Though exhausted, Marcus refused to let the momentum fade. If anything, the incident had reignited his passion for reform, fueling his determination to create lasting change. One particularly poignant moment came when Marcus received a letter from a young boy named Jamal, who lived in South Central Los Angeles. In neat, careful handwriting, Jamal wrote, "Dear Mr. Thompson, thank you for standing up for people like me. When I saw what happened to you on TV, I thought, if it can happen to him, then nobody is safe. But you didn't give up, and that makes me believe we can make things better someday." Reading Jamal's words brought tears to Marcus's eyes. It reminded him why he had chosen this path in the first place, to give voice to the voiceless and fight for a world where everyone, regardless of race or background, could live without fear of unjust treatment. Determined to honor Jamal's faith in him, Marcus vowed to keep pushing forward, no matter how daunting the challenges ahead might seem. As the days turned into weeks, the fallout from the incident continued to reverberate throughout the country. Talk shows invited experts to discuss implicit bias training and the need for cultural sensitivity within law enforcement. Schools incorporated discussions about racial profiling into their curriculums, using Marcus's experience as a teaching moment. Even Hollywood producers expressed interest in turning the story into a film, hoping to shine a light on systemic racism and inspire audiences to take action. Through it all, Marcus remained focused on the bigger picture. While grateful for the support he'd received, he understood that true progress required more than apologies or hashtags. It demanded structural changes, honest dialogue, and unwavering commitment from everyone involved, from policymakers and police departments to ordinary citizens. In one of his final public appearances related to the incident, Marcus addressed a packed auditorium at UCLA, where students, faculty, and activists had gathered to hear him speak. Standing at the podium, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. "Change doesn't happen overnight," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "But every step we take toward justice brings us closer to the world we want to see. Let this moment be a reminder that silence is complicity and courage is contagious. Together we can build a future where no one has to endure what I, and so many others, have faced." The audience erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the hall. As Marcus stepped down from the stage, he couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. The road ahead would undoubtedly be long and difficult, but for the first time in a while, he believed real change was possible. The weeks following Marcus Thompson's arrest at LAX marked a turning point in the national conversation about policing, racial bias, and accountability. The incident had not only exposed deep-seated flaws within law enforcement, but also ignited a wave of activism that swept across the country. People from all corners of society, students, teachers, business leaders, artists, and everyday citizens, joined forces to demand systemic change. For Marcus, this period was both exhausting and inspiring, as he found himself at the center of a movement larger than anything he'd ever imagined. In the days immediately after the arrest, protests erupted in major cities nationwide. Thousands took to the streets, holding signs that read, "Bias-free policing now" and "Justice starts with accountability." Social media campaigns gained momentum, with hashtags like "No More Profiling" and "Reform for All" trending for days on end. Activists organized teach-ins, panel discussions, and community forums, using Marcus's story as a springboard to discuss broader issues of inequality and injustice. The energy was palpable, a collective determination to ensure that what happened to Marcus would never happen again, not just to high-profile figures but to anyone. Meanwhile, the fallout for officers Greg Nolan and Ryan Chavez intensified. Their case became a flashpoint in debates about police misconduct and implicit bias. Internal investigations revealed troubling patterns in their past behavior, including multiple complaints of racial profiling and excessive force. These findings only fueled public outrage, leading to calls for their immediate dismissal and potential criminal charges. Protesters gathered outside LAPD headquarters chanting slogans like, "Fire the racists" and "Protect our communities." The LAPD, under immense pressure, announced a series of measures aimed at addressing public concerns. Chief of Police Linda Martinez held a press conference, pledging to implement stricter oversight protocols and mandatory bias training for all officers. She also vowed to review decades-old policies that critics argued perpetuated discriminatory practices. While some praised her efforts as a step in the right direction, others dismissed them as mere lip service, accusing the department of dragging its feet when it came to real reform. Amidst the chaos, Marcus continued to advocate tirelessly for meaningful change. He traveled extensively, speaking at town halls, universities, and conferences, sharing his experience and urging listeners to channel their anger into action. At one such event in Chicago, he addressed a packed auditorium, his words resonating deeply with the diverse crowd. "What happened to me wasn't an isolated incident," he said, his voice firm yet compassionate. "It was a symptom of a much bigger problem, one that affects millions of people every single day. If we're serious about creating a fairer, more just society, We need to tackle this issue head-on. Marcus's message struck a chord, particularly with young activists who saw him as a bridge between generations. Many admired his ability to remain calm and composed despite the injustices he faced, viewing him as a role model for resilience and leadership. One college student approached him after a speech, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for standing up," she said, clutching a notebook filled with notes from his talk. "Your courage gives me hope that things can get better." But while Marcus inspired many, he also faced criticism from some quarters. Skeptics accused him of grandstanding, suggesting that his high-profile status gave him an unfair advantage over ordinary victims of police misconduct. Others argued that focusing too much on individual cases detracted attention from the structural issues plaguing law enforcement. Marcus listened to these critiques with humility, acknowledging that no solution was perfect and that progress often required compromise. On Capitol Hill, lawmakers scrambled to respond to the growing outcry. Senators introduced bipartisan legislation aimed at combating racial profiling, increasing transparency in policing, and establishing independent oversight bodies to investigate misconduct. Dubbed the Law Enforcement Accountability Act, the bill quickly garnered widespread support, with both Democrats and Republicans recognizing the urgent need for reform. Civil rights organizations hailed it as a landmark moment, though they cautioned that passing the law was only the first step. Enforcement and implementation would be equally critical. As the legislative process unfolded, Marcus played a key role in shaping the bill's provisions. Drawing on his years of experience in law enforcement, he worked closely with lawmakers to craft policies that balanced accountability with practicality. He emphasized the importance of data collection, advocating for the creation of a national database to track incidents of racial profiling and use of force violations. "We can't fix what we don't measure," he explained during a Senate hearing. Transparency is the foundation of trust. The hearings themselves became must-watch events, drawing millions of viewers eager to see how Congress would address the crisis. Marcus's testimony, delivered with characteristic poise and passion, left a lasting impression on legislators and the public alike. When asked how he managed to stay optimistic despite everything he'd endured, he smiled faintly and replied, "Optimism isn't about ignoring the challenges, it's about believing that we have the power to overcome them. And I believe in us." While the political arena buzzed with activity, grassroots movements gained steam as well. Community organizations launched initiatives to educate the public about their rights during interactions with law enforcement. Artists created murals and installations honoring victims of police brutality, transforming cityscapes into powerful reminders of the work still needed. Musicians released songs inspired by Marcus's story, blending poignant lyrics with stirring melodies to amplify the call for justice. One particularly impactful project emerged from a group of tech-savvy activists who developed a mobile app designed to document encounters with police. Dubbed Witness Protect, the app allowed users to record videos, upload them securely to a cloud server, and share them with advocacy groups or legal teams. Within weeks of its launch, thousands downloaded the app, praising it as a vital tool for holding authorities accountable. Marcus publicly endorsed the initiative, calling it a game-changer in the fight for transparency. Despite the progress being made, challenges persisted. Resistance to reform remained strong in certain quarters, with some police unions arguing that increased scrutiny would make officers hesitant to do their jobs effectively. Critics of the reforms pointed to rising crime rates in certain areas, claiming that calls for accountability were undermining public safety. These arguments sparked heated debates, highlighting the complexity of balancing civil liberties with law enforcement needs. Through it all, Marcus remained steadfast, refusing to let setbacks deter him. He understood that change was rarely linear. There would be victories and defeats, moments of triumph and periods of frustration. What mattered most was staying committed to the cause, even when the path forward seemed uncertain. In late November, nearly 3 months after the arrest, the Law Enforcement Accountability Act passed both chambers of Congress with overwhelming bipartisan support. President Harris signed the bill into law during a ceremony attended by Marcus, civil rights leaders, and families of victims of police misconduct. As cameras flashed and applause filled the room, Marcus stood beside the president, his expression a mix of pride and solemnity. "This is a historic day," President Harris declared, her voice echoing through the White House Rose Garden. "But let us not forget that laws alone cannot heal the wounds of injustice. It will take all of us, citizens, policymakers, and law enforcement, to build a future where everyone is treated with dignity and respect." When it was his turn to speak, Marcus stepped up to the podium, his presence commanding yet humble. "Today we celebrate a victory," he began, pausing to look out at the sea of faces before him. "But tomorrow, we return to the work ahead. This law is not the end, it's the beginning. A promise to keep fighting, to keep pushing, and to never settle for anything less than true equality." His words resonated deeply, earning a standing ovation from those in attendance and millions watching from home. As the ceremony concluded and guests mingled, Marcus took a quiet moment to reflect. The road had been long and arduous, but he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fight for justice was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, he believed that real change was within reach. Months after the passage of the Law Enforcement Accountability Act, the impact of Marcus Thompson's arrest at LAX continued to ripple through the nation. What had started as a deeply personal and humiliating ordeal for Marcus had evolved into a catalyst for transformative change, touching lives across the country in ways no one could have predicted. From classrooms to boardrooms, from city streets to legislative chambers, conversations about racial bias, police accountability, and systemic reform were now firmly entrenched in the national consciousness. For Marcus, life began to settle into a new rhythm. The constant media appearances, interviews, and public speeches gradually tapered off, giving him time to reflect on the journey he'd been thrust into. Yet, even as things quieted down, the scars of that night at the airport lingered, not just for him, but for countless others who saw themselves in his story. He knew that while laws and policies were essential, true healing required something deeper: understanding, empathy, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. One evening, as Marcus sat in his home office in Washington, D.C., he flipped through a stack of letters he'd received from people around the world. Some were handwritten notes from students thanking him for inspiring them to pursue careers in law or social justice. Others came from parents sharing stories of their own encounters with discrimination, hoping that his experience would help prevent similar injustices for future generations. One letter in particular stood out, a heartfelt message from an elderly woman named Ruth, who wrote, "Your courage reminds me of my son, who didn't make it home one night because of prejudice. Thank you for keeping his memory alive by fighting for a better tomorrow." Reading these words brought tears to Marcus's eyes. It was a stark reminder that behind every statistic, policy debate, and hashtag, there were real people, families torn apart, dreams shattered, and lives forever changed. This realization fueled his determination to ensure that the momentum sparked by his arrest didn't fade. To keep the conversation alive, Marcus launched a nonprofit organization called Pathways to Justice. Its mission was simple, yet ambitious: to bridge the gap between communities and law enforcement by fostering dialogue, promoting education, and supporting grassroots initiatives aimed at dismantling systemic racism. The organization quickly gained traction, partnering with schools, advocacy groups, and police departments to create programs focused on mutual respect and accountability. One of its flagship projects was the Community Policing Academy, a training program designed to bring officers and citizens together in collaborative workshops. Participants engaged in role-playing exercises, candid discussions, and team-building activities, all aimed at breaking down barriers and building trust. Early, results were promising, with participants reporting increased empathy and a greater understanding of each other's perspectives. Officers admitted they had never considered how their actions might be perceived by marginalized communities, while residents expressed appreciation for the opportunity to voice their concerns directly to law enforcement. As Pathways to Justice grew, So did its influence. Celebrities, athletes, and influencers lent their support, using their platforms to amplify the organization's message. A viral campaign featuring testimonials from both police officers and community members went global, sparking interest in replicating the model internationally. Countries grappling with similar issues reached out to Marcus, seeking guidance on adapting the program to fit their unique contexts. Back in the United States, the implementation of the Law Enforcement Accountability Act marked another milestone. Independent oversight boards sprang up in cities nationwide, tasked with investigating complaints of misconduct and ensuring compliance with new transparency measures. Body cameras became mandatory for all officers, and footage was made accessible to the public through secure online portals. Data collected under the Act revealed troubling patterns of racial profiling and excessive force, prompting further reforms and renewed calls for cultural shifts within policing. Despite these advances, resistance remained. Critics argued that the changes placed undue burdens on law enforcement, making it harder for officers to do their jobs effectively. Some departments struggled to adapt, facing internal pushback and logistical challenges. In response, Marcus emphasized the importance of patience and persistence. Change doesn't happen overnight, he often said during speaking engagements. It takes time, effort, and a commitment to learning from mistakes. But if we stay focused on the goal, justice for all, we'll get there. His message resonated not only with activists and policymakers, but also with rank-and-file officers who genuinely wanted to improve their relationships with the communities they served. Many credited Marcus's leadership style, calm, compassionate, and solution-oriented, for helping them see beyond stereotypes and biases. At a conference in Miami, a young officer approached Marcus after his keynote speech, visibly emotional. "I used to think I was doing everything right," he confessed. "But hearing your story made me realize how much work I still need to do. Thank you for showing us the way forward." Marcus smiled warmly, placing a hand on the officer's shoulder. "We're all learning," he replied. "None of us has all the answers, but together we can find them." As the months turned into years, the legacy of Marcus's arrest solidified. Textbooks began including his story as a case study and lessons about civil rights and systemic reform. Documentaries chronicled the events at LAX and their aftermath, weaving personal narratives with broader historical context. Artists created murals depicting Marcus alongside other trailblazers in the fight for equality, cementing his place in the collective memory of the nation. In 2025, Marcus delivered a landmark address at the annual National Law Enforcement Conference in New York City. Standing before an audience of thousands, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. "When I was arrested at LAX, I felt anger, humiliation, and fear," he admitted, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "But more than anything, I felt a responsibility to speak up, to stand firm, and to turn pain into purpose. That responsibility hasn't faded. It grows stronger with each passing day." He paused, scanning the room filled with police chiefs, officers, and advocates. "Let us remember that justice isn't a destination. It's a journey that requires courage, humility, and an unwavering belief in our shared humanity. Together we can build a world where no one is judged by the color of their skin, the uniform they wear, or the badge they carry, but by the content of their character." The crowd erupted into applause, rising to their feet in a standing ovation. As Marcus stepped away from the podium, he couldn't help but feel a profound sense of gratitude for the allies who had stood by him, for the critics who had pushed him to do better, and for the countless individuals whose stories had inspired him to keep going. That night, as he walked along the bustling streets of Manhattan, Marcus allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The road ahead would undoubtedly be long and fraught with challenges, but for the first time in a long while he felt hopeful. Hopeful that the seeds of change planted during those tumultuous months were taking root. Hopeful that the next generation would inherit a world closer to the ideals of fairness and equality, and hopeful that one day, incidents like the one he endured would be relics of the past, a testament to how far society had come. As he disappeared into the crowd, blending seamlessly with the throngs of people rushing to catch trains, grab dinner, or simply enjoy the vibrant energy of the city, Marcus carried with him a quiet resolve. The fight wasn't over, but he knew he wasn't alone. Together, they would continue to march forward. One step, one conversation, one act of courage at a time. The sun was setting over Washington, D.C., casting a warm orange glow across the city as FBI Director Marcus Thompson double-checked his briefcase before heading to the airport. Marcus was not just any public figure. He was one of the most respected leaders in American law enforcement, known for his sharp mind, calm demeanor, and unwavering commitment to justice. But today something felt different. Maybe it was the heaviness in the air or the nagging feeling that had been lingering since he woke up that morning. Whatever it was, Marcus couldn't shake it off. He arrived at Ronald Reagan National Airport with plenty of time to spare. As he walked through the bustling terminal, people glanced at him, some recognizing him from news clips, others simply noticing the quiet confidence he carried. Marcus didn't pay much attention to the stares. After years in the spotlight, he'd grown used to them. His focus was on the upcoming conference in Los Angeles, where he would deliver a keynote speech about police reform. It was a topic close to his heart, one he believed could change lives if handled correctly. After checking in and going through security without incident, Marcus settled into a chair near Gate 27, scrolling through emails on his phone while waiting for boarding to begin. The flight was routine, a standard cross-country journey that he had taken dozens of times before. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Yet, as the plane lifted off the runway and soared into the evening sky, Marcus found himself staring out the window, lost in thought. He wondered how many more speeches, meetings, and policy changes it would take to truly address the deep-rooted issues plaguing the justice system. When the plane touched down at Los Angeles International Airport, LAX, Marcus grabbed his carry-on bag and joined the steady stream of passengers disembarking. The terminal buzzed with activity, families reuniting, business travelers rushing to catch connecting flights, and tourists snapping photos of the iconic palm trees visible through the windows. For a moment, everything felt normal. Marcus made his way to the baggage claim area, pulling out his phone to check the schedule for the next day. That's when it happened. Two uniformed officers approached him, their expressions stern and accusatory. One of them stepped forward, blocking Marcus's path. "Sir, we need you to come with us," the officer said firmly, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. Marcus blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" he replied, his voice calm but tinged with confusion. "Is there a problem? You have reports of a suspect matching your description involved in a theft earlier today?" The second officer chimed in, his hand resting conspicuously on the holster of his gun. "We'll need to verify your identity." A knot formed in Marcus's stomach. He knew this wasn't random. The accusation itself was vague enough to apply to almost anyone, and the way the officers were looking at him, with suspicion and thinly veiled hostility, spoke volumes. Still, he maintained his composure. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out his official FBI credentials, holding them up for the officers to see. "I'm the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation," he said evenly. "You can confirm my identity if you'd like." But instead of backing down, the officers exchanged skeptical glances. "These could be fake," one muttered under his breath, loud enough for Marcus to hear. Before he could respond, they gestured for him to step aside. Passers-by began to notice the commotion, some slowing down to watch curiously, while others quickly averted their eyes, unwilling to get involved. As Marcus followed the officers to a nearby corner of the terminal, his mind raced. This wasn't supposed to happen, not to someone in his position. Hadn't he dedicated his entire career to serving the public? Hadn't he worked tirelessly to build trust between communities and law enforcement? And yet, here he was, being treated like a criminal in broad daylight, surrounded by strangers who either didn't know what to make of the situation or simply didn't care. The officers wasted no time. Without explanation, they slapped handcuffs on Marcus's wrists, ignoring his protests. His heart sank as he realized the gravity of the moment. This wasn't just an embarrassing misunderstanding. It was a stark reminder of the systemic biases, that still existed within institutions meant to protect and serve. Even someone as high profile as the FBI director wasn't immune to them. Travelers continued to file past, some pausing to snap photos or record videos on their phones. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Isn't that the FBI guy? Why are they arresting him? This doesn't look right." For Marcus, each passing second felt heavier than the last. He wanted to say something, to defend himself, but he chose silence, knowing that anything he said might only escalate the situation further. Standing there in handcuffs, Marcus couldn't help but think about all the individuals who had faced similar indignities without the privilege of fame or influence. How many others had been wrongfully detained, humiliated, or worse because of assumptions based on race? The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, a symbol of authority and justice, powerless against the very prejudices he had spent years trying to dismantle. Despite the chaos swirling around him, Marcus remained composed. He reminded himself that this wasn't just about him. It was about the bigger picture. If handled carefully, this moment could become a turning point, a catalyst for change. But first, he needed to survive it.